Kant said, existence is not something that can be predicated. It's not something you can say anything about because it's already there before you speak. It is the act of speaking, and you can self-reference yourself, but still the self-referencing was already being. It already existed. So you see the problem here. But I think that ground of being, which Tillich said God was, is is what I would call a mystery. And as the fundamental ground of being, this mystery cannot be explained reductionistically. So we cannot replace religion with science and rationalism. Because, I said this in my video response to Stefbot's video about drugs, that rationality isn't an end in itself. And that when we let it become one, I think the atheist typically calls people to doubt instead of just believe in the dogmas of some particular book or scripture. So we must doubt. And yet, so often an atheist will come to a conclusion through doubt that existence is nothing but material, but matter, the particles and atoms which randomly collide and, accidentally form higher stages of complexity, which ultimately are meaningless, and there's no telos, there's no greater purpose to any of it. That is as much a metaphysical belief as someone who believes in the literal myths of the Bible. So, to talk about God as the ground of being, though, which I think Sharpton was trying to point at, but just wasn't very articulate at describing, or wasn't very articulate at distinguishing his position from the position that Hitchens was taking. That ground of being is the mystery of existence. And we can sort of see this process where in modern philosophy and really what became science, if you look at someone like Descartes, who was one of the major figureheads in this transition from theology to philosophy to science, what he really did was he took God, this all-knowing, omnipotent, omnipresent, omnipowerful entity, and recreated himself in God's image, and said that the ego, the subject which observes the world, can have perfect knowledge of that world because God said so. But, the famous dictum, I think, therefore I am, he's God is the one who says I am, traditionally, in the pre-modern mythic understanding. God is the creator, but Descartes is pulling God down from heaven, putting him in his head and saying, now the ego is the creator, and the ego has knowledge of the world, because the ego's language and the representations which are directly evident to that ego are truth. And man can therefore come to know the world perfectly. All that Descartes did was replace what used to be a mythical belief in a God up there in the sky into quote-unquote rational belief in an ego in here, which divides the world up into the components of its own knowledge. But both of these are sort of metaphysical claims, whether we're saying God's up in the sky and decrees everything from high above on a cloud, or God is ourselves, our egos in here, decreeing what's real from the brain out. I think what we need to see is that pulling God out from heaven and putting him in our head doesn't change the fact that our own consciousness then becomes the central mystery. We haven't really explained anything away. We haven't explained away existence by putting consciousness here. And, what is knowledge in the first place? Who is it that knows? This is still a fundamental mystery, no matter how atheistic we may be or how rational we may be. We cannot use rationality to reduce existence to something which could be printed on a piece of paper and then, known from that point forward for all time. Reality is too multi-dimensional and multi-perspectival for that. And I find myself unable sometimes to take a side in these types of theist versus atheist arguments, because while I may agree with the atheist's attack of the cruelties which are a result of literalist extremist belief in certain religious dogmas, I understand where someone like Reverend Al Sharpton is coming from when he says that God is this, it's a preconceptual thing, or it's an existential thing. It's not something which you believe in or doubt. It's the ground of being itself. And to have a discussion about it when we only refer to how some people in the past have used this idea of God to do bad things is to miss the point of this existence, which, we could either say existence is the most abstract term in the English language because you can't say anything specific about it other than that it exists, or we could say that it's the most profound word in the human language because of this experience right now, which I can't say anything about. And maybe that's why the Reverend was reduced to silence a lot of the time, because he couldn't respond to Hitchens' criticisms other than saying basically, of course God exists, and you haven't, which Hitchens agreed he hadn't said anything to disprove the existence of God, which for Sharpton again is nothing but the sheer fact that we exist, which I think we would all be hard-pressed to admit isn't a kind of miracle.